All right, so this week we are talking about an extra chapter that I added. We did S4 last week and S3 the week before. And since this book was written, there is a new object-oriented system in R S7. I should have put the obligatory XKCD in here of, it's this is ridiculous. Why do we have so many object-oriented systems? We need one that does everything. And so now we have just yet another object-oriented system. Um, but like we'll see, S7 was specific or is specifically being crafted to kind of fit in to an S3 world. So if you keep using S3, you're fine. If you got stuff that's already in S3, you're fine. But then you can like add to it with S7. And I guess I'll talk about that more in just a second. All right. So our learning objectives today, I like wrote out a bunch of stuff and kind of trimmed these down to kind of the core. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges with S3 and S4 that motivated the development of S7. We're going to see how to create S7 classes and then S7 generics and methods. We're going to define, actually, that bullet. We are not going to define custom constructors for S7 classes because it's the slide I was going to go back to and never did. We'll probably end up talking about it a little bit, and we'll use S7 or talk about how you can use S7 with S3 and or S4, how it kind of can fit in. All right. So the motivations for S7. It is at least intended to resolve some of the challenges that have come up with S3 over the years, which, by the way, also is what S4 was supposed to do. So, we'll see how that goes. Something we've seen, or we did see a couple weeks ago, that S3 has no formal class definitions. It's kind of a sloppy system. That is also kind of S3's strength, that it's kind of easy to just slap it into something and it works pretty well, but it means that it's easy for things to go bad. It's hard to tell how something is like intended to work sometimes. And so S7 is intended to add some structure onto that. Similarly, S3 methods can be difficult to find. We saw how you can use this loop package, or there's the methods function that you can use to kind of find methods, but it's not obvious when you're trying to look at, if you look at print, you can't tell what methods there are for print very easily. S3 properties are in attributes, and the attr function does fuzzy matching, which I probably knew but hadn't thought about. And so that means that if you have two like similarly named properties of an S3 object, you can accidentally get the wrong one and it doesn't give you any errors. I guess if they're similarly named too much, that can happen anyway. But if it's, it can do fuzzy matchings. I've had that with like list elements where things were too close and then got a fuzzy match before. So fuzzy matching can be messy, and usually want to know about that at least when you're programming. And also, just a second, I need to. He talks a little bit in this vignette that I use for this that um, use method it can be confusing to figure out exactly what is going to happen, and actually next method is even worse. But in the help docs for use method, it has a section that starts with now for some obscure details that need to appear somewhere. And that just kind of tells you that there's like extra little bits and bobs of weirdness of how things work. I think it was 4.4 made it a little bit less confusing, but when there's a big switch in our different R versions are doing things differently, that can actually add to some confusion. And yeah, the extra piece of that is next method. What next method means can change depending on what packages are loaded. And so if some other like in between method is defined in a package, what happens can be a little bit unexpected. And so S7 makes it more explicit. You don't just say next method, you say this method, do a method for this class. And then we aren't going to talk about this at all, but there's conversion between S3 classes. You can define an as uh, function, like as data frame, as tibble, as whatever. Um, but the way that is done isn't very uh, strict. And not that it has to be strict in S7, you could still define whatever as function you want. But there is a convert generic in S7 that you can use to formally say, when I convert this thing to that thing, this is what I want to happen. So these are the things that they wanted to address from S3. And I'm sure there are more. They have all their like meeting notes on the package down site for S7. So if you really are interested, you can kind of dig through. There's the original proposal and all the meetings they had to figure out what it should be. So I said it. Oh no, never mind. That's the next slide. It also is meant to resolve some of the challenges with S4, as we saw last week, or people who were here. Uh, S4 has multiple inheritance, where a class can be a subclass of two different things that kind of come together to make this new thing. It's a neat idea, but the way that it's written in this vignette is that it causes more problems than it solves. It just leads to, we saw last week, these kind of insane trees of what could happen, and trying to figure out what is going to happen based on what I have can be really confusing. S4's method dispatch has like a strict set of rules of how it's going to figure out which method to dispatch based on the pairs or the based on multiple classes of the incoming things and what the inheritance trees are and all this stuff. And so, okay, it's a set of rules, but it's a little bit magical, and so it can be hard to predict what's going to happen. S7 says no, you got to say exactly what is going to happen. And something I do think it's interesting. I don't think this is wrong, that S4 and S3 are completely separate systems. They have a tiny bit of overlap, but for the most part, you can't like extend an S3 class using S4 and vice versa. They are different ways of dealing with the multi-method kind of idea. And that made it hard for people to switch from S3 to S4. You can't kind of have a mix of S3 and S4 for objects. And then, like talked about this last week as well, that you can use at to access slots in S4 objects, but like you're not supposed to. And it is kind of funny because they're like, no, so with S7, you're supposed to be able to use at, and it has validation, so it won't break anything. We'll talk about a little bit. You can break it in S7 if you try hard enough, but at least it's not. It's harder to to break it versus using at is so easy. And so in S4 you can break some things. Now, caveat on all of this, I don't think I've written any S4 code. Maybe some stuff that like touches dates or things like playing with Lubridate, because Lubridate has a S4 or had S4 in it at the time of this book being written. I can't remember if it still does. So I only know what I've kind of seen. Like I did watch last week's meeting and got a review from that, read through the chapter. But anyway, so this is the notes on the vignette about motivation for S7. Mm-hmm. Something that I kind of came to realize in working on this is I had always thought of it is it's S7 is S3 plus S4. It's like both of them put together, but it's more like it's an extension of S3 to do the things that S4 was supposed to do, but it's not like it has some overlap compatibility with S4, but it has a lot more with S3. It's much more an extension of S3. So I have a whole section about that, assuming we get to that section.
Up in like a euphemism almost.
Yeah, like I guess the one thing where I've seen S7 implemented in a major package is ggplot2, which actually it wasn't replacing S3 or S4. It's like slotting in with their custom other oriented system that they had in ggplot2. But it's more like if you have code that's written in S3, you can extend it with S7. You can slowly transition, no problem. If you have code that's written in S4, you should, like the advice would be, rewrite it in S7. But that means anything downstream from there. There's some you can do to for a slow piecemeal change, but it's not as clean as it is with S3 because as we'll see, S7 objects are S3 objects. And so you can use normal S3 methods and all that kind of thing. So we'll
That's
see.
gonna make like so about conductor community they use S4 objects
Right.
a lot. And since there isn't that S7 is very different from S4 and would break things,
Yeah.
yeah, there's not gonna be much adoption unless people keep
So
all things.
I think, I mean, I'm sure to some degree, I don't know all the details. I'll bet there are ways you could build like uh, uh, a translator basically in between. And so you could slowly roll it out that way. They probably have plans for this, but it's, I'll say it's way easier to transition S7 or S3 to S7 as far as I could tell. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. Um, I would guess, well, I don't know if we have time at the end. I want to talk about like I don't think S3 or S4 are going anywhere anytime soon. Um,
Mhm.
I think we really do just have another system now. But if I were outside of Bioconductor and wanted something like S4, I would use S7. Um, but inside of Bioconductor, use S4 because that's what everything else is using. And even in these slides, I'll show you that I threw in a quick S3 method because it was easier than doing the same thing in S7 just in the middle of these slides. So to use with S7 objects that I had just created because they're also S3 objects. All right. So, all right, let's talk about classes and objects. That's the title of the thing, but properties are like a big piece of the classes in S7. So S7 has the function new class. You use that to formally define the class. It's kind of like set class. It's kind of a combination of set class and new and set validity. Yeah, validity from S4, or it's equivalent to the constructor and validator and helper that he showed us in the S3 chapter. So you define this new class. Every example on the site shows like person gets new class person. I didn't replicate this, and it could be gone now, but a year or two ago when I was using S7 relatively heavily, trying it out, when this was the same as this, I would run into issues when I used the class as a property in another class. And so I found that everything was resolved if I just used two different names. One is like the name of the class, and one is the constructor of the class. Kind of just like what he did in uh, the S3 chapter. So another way to put this could have been like new person is a new class. It's the thing that you use to define a new person, but it's also kind of the class definition object. So it's a little weird. But I do notice that like you use class character and class numeric, which are exported by uh, S7, and S7 doesn't export a function or a whatever a class definition that's just called character. Now it would overlap with character, but they don't do a capital C character or something like that. They do class character. So I kind of echoed that. It's an aside. Um, I need to go dig in and see if maybe they have made whatever problem it was that I ran into not an issue anymore. I can probably do that by, I think I have closed issues in S7 where Hadley was like, oh, this is why that's happening. I was like, but this is your advice. So, okay. Anyway, so you define the class, you give it a name, and then you give it a list of properties. And those properties have specified uh, types like there's class character, class numeric. They're all the base classes from R. There's also, we're going to see it kind of towards the end, there's class any, and you can do other fancy things of, saying different levels of distinction of what these things have to be. But this gives it a quick um, we'll see in a second, it does some basic validation because it's saying, okay, this one has to be character, this one has to be numeric. And so I can tell you if something is wrong. Gives people a little bit more info about how things are supposed to work. And so then I can make myself. And when I print that, it has that name and age property on the object that is me. There is this S7 inherits function in S7. It's kind of like, or it's very much like inherits in base R, except instead of giving it the name of the class, you give it that class constructor, and it'll say, is this thing made from that? Yes. No. Under the hood, pretty well, yeah, it's doing the full validation. It is checking that the class name is right and that it has the right properties. And really what it's doing is when you create this object, it has an attribute that is the S7 class, which is this object. And so it can check for, does it have exactly this constructor built into it? And so that's what's going on there. But also, this is an S3 object. It has a class. It has two classes, person, which is the one I defined here. Oops, I'm pointing at the wrong screen. Sorry, I've got my notes versus the ones that you guys see. But yeah, so when I do class, it's getting this class that I defined, and then any S7 object also has class S7 object. And so you can use that to do some fall through methods. And again, inherits still also works with it. Just so it is an S3 object, but it's also an S7 object. So kind of like we saw in S4, you can access all these properties of S4 or S7 objects with @. So me at name gets John, me at age 50. This works through, I don't remember if there's a minimum version of R, but it'll work with any version of R, but they did some stuff in base R a couple versions ago to make it cleaner. So if you're using a modern version of base R, this is actually this @ is a base R function. The base R function already exists, but now it works with S7 nice and cleanly. Even though S7 is currently a package that's separate from base R, it's still the way it fetches, the way @ works. I think they might have made it a generic, or they made it to where the S7 could extend it cleanly, something like that. I don't remember, but anyway, so that gets the properties. It's like S3 attributes, but again, ATTR is fuzzy. So these are not. You have to exactly match the name. And then it's again like S4 slots, but in S4 you're discouraged from using the @ access. And in S4, actually, we'll see the next slide. When you try to set using the @, so you can set with the @, they're validated during construction, but they're also validated when you try to assign something to a property. And so if I use a non-number, it automatically says, oh no, you can't do that. Age has to be a number because it was defined as that in the definition. And that's where it's kind of why they tell you in S4 not to access things this way, is you can break things. You can also set up a validator. There's a whole separate step for that. But it doesn't if it does it, it's much more basic. You can break it in S4 much more so than you can in S7. Again, I don't use S4, so I don't want to say that as confidently as I was about to of how it works. And then it also does this basic validation during creation. So if you try to create an object that has a character for the age, it'll say it has to be an integer or a double, not character. And then also with the integers for the name, it says it has to be character, not integer. I didn't get to it, but this is where you might say, I mean, not in this case, well, maybe even in this case, but you might have a case where you're like, well, it needs to end up as character. And so I want to actually accept numeric I just need to coerce it to character in the object, and that is something you can do with a custom constructor, which we'll touch on in a second. But before we do that, there's also a validator argument for new class that you can give it a specific validator and tell it things to check. Again, both on construction and on updates. And so I can say, and that validator always takes a single argument. They say to use self, and I didn't get around to it. I don't think it's doing any weird magic that you could use anything here, I think. So you could give it any validator. But so they say to use self. Back in the day when I first started playing with S7, I think they had a lot more magic than they ended up with. Like some of the stuff that was doing things and like, well, of course they're going to use the word or the object name self. They're like, no, stop that. And so whatever. Anyway, so you have a function. It takes an argument, and then you can check the properties of that argument. So if the name is not the same length as the age, then I can throw an extra error. And so if I try to do that, now it'll say name and age must be the same length. So it returns or it throws that error. This validator should return a character vector. So I threw just one error, but you can do all kinds of checks in here and and it'll give you all the things that are wrong with what you try to set up. But then if I go ahead and set up my me again, and then try to set the age to not match with my name, it'll say name and age must have the same length or be the same length. So here you can make this, again, I'm pointing at the wrong screen, sorry. But you can make this line up, or you can make it check things that it's not going to check by default, which is really cool and powerful. And I've done a lot of stuff with both constructors and validators to make things work. Basically, it keeps it valid through its whole life cycle. But you might notice like this, my example is a little forced. He has an example of a range class. And let's say you have a range class that has a minimum and maximum, and you might set up a validator that says the min has to be lower than the max. Well, while you're changing one of those values, it might be momentarily wrong, like momentarily break the validation. And so what they have is there's this props function. And so, I've got this me was just me, but if I try to change just the name to me and my wife, it will say, no, you can't do that because name and age have to have the same length. You set up that validation rule. And so you can make a thing, make a function that uses this props function to set them at the same time. So set the name and the age via a list, and then return the object that I just fixed. And if I do that, then it is changing both of those properties all at once. And so then we get this vector that has, this person object that is updated all at once. Again, with the range, that can be really useful. Go ahead, Nick.
That is really cool, but it seems like like right now you have like me and then the new class person. No, it's not. It's not communicative, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that the names are the best, and it is funny. Almost all the examples of things in the S7 docs are showing like single objects, and we're working with data. Like, there's a reason that the basic way of looking at anything in R is a vector, not a scalar. And so I was mostly just trying to force myself to think of this. I called it a person, but it really should be like a people object, I guess. Of it's a vector. But yeah, it's just demo examples. If we get to it, maybe. So it is funny. I have a package that I haven't worked on in a while, and then I read all these vignettes, and I'm like, oh, did everything wrong. So I want to go fix it now. Some of it didn't exist. I don't think that they had the convert generic when I was first working with this, but so I basically rewrote some of the logic of that. There's all this stuff. Anyway,
Just
um,
the props function as so what exactly is props as for combining? Then you're defining it to combine.
so if I did it without assignment, props X is just returning a list of all the properties of whatever X was. And so here I am with the assignment version of it, I'm redefining all of the properties of that S7 object.
Okay, so yeah, so name and age of property. So okay, I get that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's also, I think it's set props, which it doesn't update the existing object. You can use it to make a new object. That also would have worked here because in the end, I'm just returning an object. Um, these are not like we'll see in R6. These are normal R objects where you have to assign it to make it be a thing. Um, it'll make a lot more sense once we're working in R6. When you change something in R6, doesn't matter where you change it, it is that same object that you are changing. It's an environment. And I guess we did talk a little bit about environments where you can get things that feel kind of magical. Or if you're from any programming language other than R, it just feels normal. When you change something, it changes it everywhere. Um, but it can be, so it's not that here. So, I could have done the other way. Just what I am returning is this X that is a different version than the X. You have to assign it to do anything with it. I'm sure that was as clear as mud, but so something you will see here is this I just defined as an S3 method. It's a method of the C function. Um, and you can just do that. Just like you can in S3, you can make a method just by putting dot in the name of the class, and uh, R just knows to dispatch, oh, that's a method. So it will go find that one for us when I use C with a person object. Uh, that was a quick way to throw in a thing. We also have we'll see in a minute that there are S7 generics and methods that are a little bit more formally defined.
Hmm.
So next, there's this new property function. So we've been looking, every time we do this, oops, go back here. We're just saying it's these existing built-in types of properties: class character, class numeric. There's class integer, class factor. Can't remember all the base types that are like some of them have a little bit of special implementation, but you can just say it is this. This is the kind of thing I'm expecting, or you can say I'm expecting this type of property. You tell it what class it is, and it can have its own validation of uh, I want the age to always be a positive number. And so I can just say it has to be positive. If any of them are less than 0, I will throw a validation of must be positive. This validation automatically gets the name of the property as it's defined. And so you're just saying what is wrong with it. You can kind of assume at age is going to be before that or any other numeric thing. And this can work with the existing validation. So we've got this, the validator that we defined before, but we're saying that age has to be positive, this property that we just defined. And when I set that up, if I put a negative age in, I'm going to get that error. If I had put a negative age, and I think I might have it on another screen, or I ended up taking it out because there was just too much noise. But if I did a negative age and too many ages, it would give me both of those errors. Or if I did a negative age and for the name I used an integer instead of character, it would also give me that error. So it tells me everything that is wrong with my construction, which is kind of convenient.
Do you know about the order that the messages are thrown out?
uh, we'll see. I might have an example of that, but if not, I can't remember. But it is, that is important to know when you're actively working with it, because there are cases where the combinatorial, it might change what validation you would do, and so you want to know what validation happens when. Um, Yeah, again, I don't remember. I know I did learn that back in the day because I was doing some fancy things of sometimes throwing errors separate from their system, and um, mostly I don't think I would do that anymore. But um, and I forgot to check whether it's a classed error, because if not, it really should be a classed error so that we can catch it and say, oh, that was an S7 error. I want to behave, or I want to respond to that differently than I would to some error downstream. I can't remember if it is or not. I'll have to look at that in a minute. Something really neat that you can do with properties is they have other arguments other than validator, and one that we're going to look at here is a getter. And with the getter argument, you can define a function that is, what does this property return? And so here we have, I'm defining a circle class, and it has a radius, which is a number, and then an area, which is a number, but to get it, it's just going to take that radius and multiply it, square it, and multiply it by pi. So it's going to calculate the area, and always that area will be the radius squared times pi. Now, if you only have a getter here, you can't set the area, and I don't think I don't try it here, but you would get an error saying that it's read only. But so when I define it with a radius of 1, the area is pi. If I update the radius to be 2, now the area is 4 pi, which is kind of nice. But you can also, the step beyond that is, can be fully dynamic by taking that area property and having both a getter, which is exactly what I just did, and a setter, which always again takes two arguments, the object and the value that you want to set for this particular property. He, in his example, he had if they don't send anything in for it, don't do anything. I don't know how often like you can do this, but I'm sure there are cases where you don't want to break, and so I went ahead and included that if the value they send in is null or length 0, integer or something, just return the original self. But otherwise, if it's not empty, you set the radius to be the square root of that value over pi. So calculate it backwards, return that object, and now this the object has that updated area and the radius. So again, we can just create a new circle with radius 1, and by default, that area is going to be pi. But then I can set the area to 4 pi, and now the radius is 2. So it goes back the other direction. And I just did another one of, then I set the radius again, and the area updates. This is where you can do all kinds of useful things. And it starts to feel a little bit more like what we're going to see in R6. Like it's towards encapsulation. It has some like built-in stuff that it is doing to the object. But it's still like all of these things are still available for normal S3 or normal, whatever, S3 style multi-methods. All right. So yeah, this next slide, I was going to come back to it and I didn't. So there's also a whole, so on, I don't have it here, but we've seen in a couple of places the validator. So validator by default is just going to do the class checks, but you can have it do whatever you want. You can also set a constructor, and the docs have stuff about that, but that would be where, for example, I guess go back to here, on the person, if the name comes in and it's I can't think of for the person, this wouldn't make sense, but for something else, it might be that the name comes in as a string, and you just want it to be a number, and if it can cleanly convert to a number, you would just use it. So you would have your constructor do that, and the constructor could fail or pass a fail through to the validator, basically. depending on how you want to set that up. So you can set the constructor up to, um, you can pre-process things is basically what that comes back down to. The other thing is like the validator and constructor are just functions. And so I started to play around with this a little, that they could theoretically uh, themselves be generics that have method dispatch. And so if you are passing in a list object, then I will do some work to convert it to the person, for example. If you have a person as a list, I could convert it to a person. Or if you have person that where the first argument is character, and then there's also a second argument that is numeric, then I'll do that. And so you can make your constructor do all kinds of fancy things, basically, depending on how it comes in. But yeah, I don't have that slide. And then this next slide's a lie. I just put this somewhere else. So I'm going to skip that one entirely. But I forgot that I had set that up. All right. So this next one, so that first section was basically the S7 basics vignette, the top of the S7 basics vignette plus the classes and objects vignette. Likewise, this section is the like bottom of the S7 basics vignette, and then the generics and methods vignette. Since there's no chapter, I was kind of trying to stitch one together. All right. So very, very similarly, you define S7 generics and methods with new generic and new method to go along with new class and new property. So I made this function rold, where it's a generic, and the first thing is with new generic, you say the name of your function, which here it really should echo the name. It's kind of like use method. You have to give it the name. And then you tell it a vector, or you give it a vector of names of arguments that every method should have for this function. And so you never define a generic function. You like call a function that defines the generic function. And then when you want to define a method, you call the method function with the generic that you want to define a method for, and a list of classes to dispatch on. So we're going to start out with just one class, but we'll see in a second how we can use multiple dispatch. And so here, this function has an X argument, just like the generic said it should. And if they're older than 40 and they're not my wife, then they are old, is the definition of this method. And so we've got this us object and making sure that yes, it is. And now it's going to go through and check that. And it's I am old, but Layla is not.
So
and again, sorry, go ahead.
The second argument in new generic, that could be a vector of all the arguments.
Yes.
Right.
I don't think I got a slide with that because again, I think we're already going to probably push up against the time. There's you can do things with setting arguments that everything must have versus setting the methods can have arguments that the generic does not have. And you can set default argument or default values in the generic that may or may, that will pass through to the method. All of that has little sections in the vignette, and I don't go into all the details of that because mostly it's look at your case of what it is and just look at that line in the vignette of what you need to do. All right. The dispatch is similar to S3 where it's doing like the inheritance tree. So if we go back to, or I'm going to make a new class called Geek, and its parent is class person. So it is a subclass of person. It's a type of person. And I'm going to redefine myself as one of those. And now if I can just call that rold function, it'll dispatch on person because I defined it for person. I didn't define it for geek, but it knows, okay, geek is a type of person. Same thing that S3 does, where it kind of goes up the chain until it finds one. Mm-hmm. I didn't. Oh, okay. Um, right. And then a difference from S3 is we saw in S3 there's next method that will find the next method that is defined for this chain of classes. And so if you have a Tibble, Tibbles have lots of classes, and so it's kind of going to walk the tree until a lot of times you'll just get to a method for list because down at the bottom, Tibbles are lists. But in between, it might hit things. The problem with that is, like I said at the beginning, if you have something that has a long chain, there could be something in the middle there that gets defined later. And if you have that package, that method will get picked up. If you don't have that package, the method won't get picked up. And so you don't know for sure like where next method is going to stop. And so they were explicit about that for S7 super. It's kind of the equivalent of next method. Um, I'm when I call super on X, it's uh, taking the input and I say, okay, the next time this X thing dispatches, I want you to dispatch to class person, which is a one of the super classes of the object that came in. And so when I do this, I'm just defining I'm going to do a thing, and then I'm going to call our old as if this thing were just a person. Something I haven't checked, they must think super must check that the object actually has that class in its tree. Um, but I didn't recheck that. Uh, like an example they gave is with date. If you're trying to find the mean of a date, you can take the mean of the number that the date is made out of and then convert that mean to a date. Um, and so they showed that as an example. But you could do all kinds of other in between things. And I don't know. I assume S7 does better at handling kind of intentional breaking because that's part of what they're building it for, is that it doesn't put up with you doing nonsense, basically. Um, but yeah, so you use this super to do the same sort of thing that you would do with next method. And then kind of the last main thing that we're going to look at is that you can do multiple dispatch, where instead of saying, um, oh, and that's right. This argument, the second argument is what you're going to dispatch on. I answered your question wrong because you can also specify different arguments to the generic, but those are specified outside of that second argument. This argument right here is what do I use for dispatch specifically? Like, what does the method care about as far as dispatch? And then you can have other arguments that are just other arguments. And so I can create this new generic combine for X and Y, and I can make a method for if both of them are class person, then this is how it will dispatch. And it takes those two arguments, it looks at both of their classes, and if they're both a person, then it uses this one. I went ahead and used, and again, yeah, us is a person object. And so if we combine a geek into a person, right now, I don't have a definition for person plus geek, so it's going to fall up to person plus person, and it dispatches based on that. And again, like both of these objects are geeks, but they combine as a person. Or I can define a method that is geek plus geek, and I did a little bit of super in here just to play around with it, and so you could have it, do the dispatch on person, and then come back and do a different thing. It's actually just the same as if I had rewritten this as class geek, but whatever. And so then it's treating it different. You could also make one for geek plus person and person plus geek. Like the order of those arguments matters. Something that I haven't shown in here, but it's especially useful for methods, is you can have a class any. So if you want, that's kind of or very much equivalent to the default method for S3. But again, it can be combinatorial, that if like the second argument is anything, and the first argument is some specific thing, we'll do this, but it'll fall through based on like specificity. And then the other thing they have is class missing, that you can say, oh, if they don't give the second argument, do this to the dispatch. And so that'll look for specifically, where they don't pass anything through. And again, that can be useful for all kinds of different cases, which we aren't going to go into in big detail. All right. So is that kind of making sense? Like you have to actually use any of this stuff. You have to actually use it for it to make sense, I think. But
I mean, yeah, it's a little. I mean, I have to, yeah, use it a little to and the last one at least. But I think it's kind of elegant.
yeah, I theoretically like it. Um, I, I still default to S3, even though I've dug into S7 a lot. It takes more uh fiddling with it. And when I get to the point where it's easy, then it'll be easy. But it's a little bit weird how you define functions, like calling a function in order to define a function makes your package it acts a little weird. There's some special things you have to do when you're using S7 in a package. It's just fiddly enough that I haven't really used it that extensively yet, except one place where I used it extensively and kind of regretted it because that package is, I think, probably more complicated than it needed to be, but I wanted to use S7. So um, I have that kind of that bad taste in my mouth about it. All right, I do want to talk a bit about compatibility. We've kind of looked at it as we went, but um, you can still call class on these S7 objects to get the S3 classes. But there's also S7 class, which gives you, like I said, it returns that constructor. So you can use that to find the object that defines the class. Um, S7 properties are attributes. So if you have code that is looking for attributes, they're still there. And that has the asterisk on it of that means that people can just change those attributes. And if you're changing them via the attr function, S7 doesn't know that it needs to be validated. Like that's a way to hack S7 objects. So you can break things. So it's still just a step beyond, like, he was like, oh, the problem with S4 is we have at, and people aren't supposed to use that, but they can, and then they can break things. And so S7, you can use at, it's fine. Just use at all you want, but don't use attr. You could break things. So it's just up another level. But it is easier in theory to use at. So S7, you can create methods for an S7 class and an S3 generic, just like I did with C, like we saw that happen. You can also create methods for S3 classes and S7 generics. We didn't see that, but there's a function, a helper function that's, instead of giving it class person, I mean, you can give it class character, and there's a dispatcher that you can do anything that they don't have defined as a special S7 definition of a class. You can just wrap your class, the name of your class in a special function. It'll know how to deal with that. And S7 classes can inherit from S3 classes, so the parent can be an S3 class, and S3 classes can S3 classes can inherit from anything because the way they inherit is you just add that to their class. So, but it works because S7 classes are just class, S3, or are in part just S3 classes, and so you can add that type of class as a parent for an S3. So the compatibility thing that I was kind of getting at the beginning. So I didn't try any S4 and S7 code, and I'm pretty sure there's a typo in the second bullet on the site. because the site says S4 classes can inherit from S3 classes. I think they meant to say S4 classes can inherit from S7 classes. Like whether or not it's true with S3 classes was kind of irrelevant to that section of the page. So I think that's supposed to be S7. I haven't submitted a pull request for that yet, but so S7 classes cannot inherit from S4 classes, but S4 classes can inherit from S7 classes. S7 can register methods for an S7 class with an S4 generic or an S4 class and an S7 generic. So that's all good at least. And both of them support class unions, but we didn't talk about the class unions in the S4 chapter, and therefore I didn't include notes about that here. But if it's something that you're using, you can see there are subtle differences in how S7 handles them. But it has has information for that. That is the last slide I have, which not bad. Guessing at about an hour's worth of content. I am interested to see how this continues to develop. Like the stated plan is that eventually S7 will get incorporated into base R. I don't know that I believe that right now. Maybe like seeing ggplot2 get rewritten with a lot of S7 made me more hopeful about it, but there are pull requests that have been just hanging open on the S7 repo, and that's always or often a bad sign. Now, it's also possible that it's like, yeah, but it works fine. Why break it? So, they might not be in a rush to change things. They did just have an S7 release a couple weeks ago or last week or something, but it was like a 0.1 release on the release, like it was 0.2.1, I think, and 0.2.0 was released a year ago. And so, like, I don't know what to think about that. Like, maybe it's that they got to a point that it pretty much works and they don't need to do a whole lot more updating. But the lack of activity is, I don't know, disheartening is not quite the right word, but it's getting there. Like,
I wonder if it'll be driven by like if ggplot2 needs something from S7, that's gonna be the driver to like update S7.
yeah. Well, and I think I suspect that is why it's kind of sitting and not moving is instead like Hadley is using it in Elmer, which is his like main focus right now.
Mm.
And so I'm sure he is finding things he doesn't like and will come back and fix it. Hadley and Davis Vaughn from the Tidyverse team are two
Mm.
of the major contributors for S7. Um, there is at least one person who I think is more from the bioconductor world, so presumably there are things happening there to see how conversion works. I I don't know. I think it's very possible that the idea of it replacing all S3 and S4 everywhere. I mean, I'm sure they knew that that's not going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
people stick with what they know. Um,
Well, there's just too much S3 and S4 code out there for it to.
right. Yeah.
Like, I was wondering just in terms of the version number thing that I mean I am an eternal optimist, so I'm always trying to put a positive spin on these things, but I'm thinking, if the version numbers aren't bumping, that if the goal is base R, entry into base R, they don't want something that they're updating a lot, right? They want something that is pretty stable. And then that plus, I don't know, like where we might be on an RV5 release, but maybe we're on our 4.5, it went to 3.6, and maybe we're a year or two out. So there's kind of
Right.
into R5. And then the other thing I was thinking is that like I know a lot of the Tidyverse team, Hadley in particular, doesn't like context switching. So if like Elmer is where he's at, then there might come a time where he's like, right, now it's at 7, and let's do this in time for V5. That's the optimism in me.
Definitely. So the one thing that and it's not a tidyverse project, so it doesn't follow tidyverse patterns necessarily. Yeah, but like I would expect 1.0 before it goes into our base R, and it doesn't seem to be progressing towards a 1.0. Like when you're at a 0.2.1, I don't know, it seems to me like they don't feel like they're there yet. Like there hasn't, and there are a lot of open issues.
Mm.
So I don't know, like, but maybe again, 15 open pull. Some of these open pull requests are just ideas, like ancient things that will never be finished.
But I was also interested to read on the release of the latest. Was it Tessat that Hadley's been experimenting with Claude Code and just like banging off closing tons of issues.
Right. Yeah. So
maybe give Claude Code 107 issues from S7. An hour later, it's ready to go to. Anyway, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, I think Claude Code would do really, really, really poorly at S7 issues because it is so weird. But anyway, yeah.
See you all. Take care.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
I feel like there are some packages that like they're
use it
generated, but they went from like 0.3 or 0.4 to like 1.
Yeah, that is true. Like 1 doesn't necessarily mean you've done a lot of minor versions. It just means that you have done enough minor versions. And maybe 0.2 base, maybe the next version will be 1.0.
Maybe they don't plan on breaking the API much. Like this is the scope of this package and what it does.
Yeah.
Then they're like, okay, we're good.
Yeah, so I think that they are, if we look at the reverse imports, ggplot2's in there, Elmer's in there. Oh, Filtro, that's Brent just released tidyverse or tidy models package. So and important, that's the other one. So it does look like they are actively using it. Ragnar is another tidy positive package.
Important for like image generation and output. Marquee.
Oh yeah.
I'm forgetting. I don't know. I think it's like Thomas Pedersen was working on that.
Oh right. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's important. I would think.
Yeah. I would guess that actually when ggplot2 got S7, probably a lot of these other related packages also got S7ized, probably. But yeah, that's not what I was thinking it was. Yeah, I'm interested to see. Like there was a lot of activity for a little while, and there definitely is not a lot of activity lately. But it has been touched in the last couple of weeks. There was the 2.1 or 0.2.1 release a couple weeks ago. I'm intrigued to see, and I do want to use it more because things like the computed properties, that's nice. The validation is nice. I do a lot of work around validation because if you're going to do a call to an API, actually, I'm sure that's a big part of the same reason that Elmer uses this is before you make your call that you're going to pay for, you want to make sure that everything is what you expect it to be. And so having the validation logic kind of, neatly built in is nice. And that is what I used it for. The package that I built around it is converting a giant list object into a formal object and checking all the properties and everything. So, yeah, I'm interested to see for sure. I'm also very much interested to see next week. Let me pull up real quick before we go that someone is doing R6. Oh, that is you. So Nick will be talking to us about R6. I have done summary, but I've done quite a lot more with R6. In that I've been working with Shiny a lot, and Shiny is R6. And so understanding R6 is very helpful for Shiny. So it'll be interesting to see. I have not reread that chapter since doing all this work with it. So
reread it. I'm also gonna try to do like comparison with like S7. I mean, obviously there's like contrast, but
yeah. So I would say that R6 is a different type of OOP than S347, but S7 starts to go towards it with things like the computed properties.
Yeah, and the validation too.
Yeah. And yeah. So, but it doesn't have other methods built into the class as much. So anyway, we'll see that next week.
Yeah.
All right. And with that, let me stop sharing. And all right, I will see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, John.